Hi, I'm Ramesh and I'm the president of the Real Ale and Cider Society. So I'm going to quickly show you how to make cider really easily. So we have a small portion on how to brew cider using real apples and using the yeast on the skins of the apples to ferment it. But if you don't have an apple tree and you still want to give it a go, what you can actually do is just buy some apple juice. So here I've got some apple and elderflower juice, and really need is sugar water. That's essentially what all fermentation is. There's sugar that yeast eats and it converts it to alcohol. So all we want to do really is grab the apple juice. What I recommend doing is buying an apple juice that is from real apples and not from concentrate. So here we've got apple and elderflower, and all we're going to do is add a small amount of yeast. So you can buy specially made cider yeast. We've also used champagne yeast before, and that gives it a really nice dry and fizzy flavour. And then all we're going to do is pop the yeast straight in. Now you're going to want to make sure that the vessel that you're using, whatever it may be, is nice and clean and sanitized. And so I'm just going to mix it up slightly. Now in terms of fermentation, what you're going to have is a massive release in gases, and that's usually CO2 from the actual yeast. So what you want to do is you don't want to close this and leave it. This will build up a lot of pressure, and so when you release it, it's essentially going to make the liquid fly up. For something like this, is get something like a rubber band and just put it across like so that it's loosely connected. And so what will happen is, as the pressure is increasing, it will just burp itself. It will have the ability to move up and down, and this works really well. So I've got some kombucha here, and so we have a rubber band here. And essentially, as the pressure is building up, it will just release the gas on its own, and then it will close itself again. You want it to be able to close itself, because if you just leave it open like that, what can happen is, anything can get in, but also, things like other bacteria, it can infect it. It's very, very important that you don't just leave it out in the open. Once you're done with something like this, what's fantastic about brewing your own cider is you can do several different things with it. After it's fermented, you can drink it on its own. You can second ferment it to try fizzy cider. What you can also do is, instead of second fermenting it, putting it into another jar and leaving it to oxidize. What this oxidization does to alcohol is it turns it into vinegar. So what you can do is turn this into alcohol and then make apple cider vinegar. You can also use other fruits, so strawberry, peaches, kiwis, anything you can imagine. You first ferment it in a similar way. So you grab the juice, convert it to alcohol. If you're using fresh fruit, you can usually use the yeast that are on the skins of the fruit. And so what you can do is convert that fruit into alcohol, and then alcohol into vinegar, but also just keep it as alcohol. I mean, people don't usually call it cider. So for example, pear cider is known as perry. When it comes to brewing cider as well, the type of apples that you choose will also determine the taste. And now I'm just going to hand you over to Dan, who will take you over how to brew with real apples and bottling.
We've nicely got some apple trees in our garden, so we've gone out, collected all the apples. It's a really simple process to make cider this way. So all you've got to do is get the juice from the apples. So the way that we're doing this today, we've got a juicer. It makes our life very, very easy because it just separates all the juice from the pulp for us. I've seen a few of these on like Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace, quite cheap. If you want to go and get one. If you don't, there's a couple more options. You can just blend the apples. If you blend it, you can separate the pulp and the juice with like cheesecloth. But you don't have to do that. You can just leave it and it will settle at the bottom anyway. So once you've got it in your container and fermented, it'll all settle down, and as long as you pour it off right, you can leave all that behind. The other method is, as well, if you've got apples, you can just cook them down. They'll reduce to a mush. The only thing there is, obviously, you've killed the yeast because you've cooked them, so you have to add yeast back in. But that's another way to make sure that they're really, really easy to work with once you've got that. The yeast is all on the skins. It's all natural yeast. So once you've got the juice out, the yeast from the skins, you put it in a fermenter for a couple of weeks, and then you've got cider.
Once you've finished fermentation, you'll notice that everything has settled down to the bottom. What you can do is use a strainer so nothing falls through, but it's just a bit of yeast, nothing too harmful, just make sure you don't drink it. I'm just going to put the cider into another vessel so that we can get ready for bottling. Once we've taken the cider out and we've left the dead yeast within the container, what we also need to do is sanitize our bottles that we're going to be using. So here we're just using a bit of brewing sanitizer, which means that it's food grade safe, which means that we don't have to rinse out the bottles completely afterwards. Once we've done that, we're going to put the cider into the bottles, remembering to leave about 1 inch headroom. This headroom is so that we can allow the gases to come out and then go back into the cider, forming our fizzy cider if you wanted secondary fermentation. If it's sweet enough, you don't need to add extra sugar like our bottles here, because the extra sugars that are in the cider will ferment. If it's not sweet enough, you can add a tiny bit of sugar, calculate it for depending on how big your bottles are. So if they're 330ml, you'll require a certain amount of sugar depending on how fizzy you want it. In terms of bottles here, we've used a bottle capper, but I actually recommend getting some of the flip bottles, which means that they're a lot easier to control, and you can check on how the fermentation is happening in the secondary by opening it once a day, just so you can keep exact pressurization that you want. Once you have that, leave it for a few days, couple of weeks, and that's it for cider. Yeah, so we make all types of stuff at the Real Ale Society. If there's any recipes, any fermentable foods that you want to particularly make, let us know, and we can. I think a lot of us have recipes for a lot of different things. For example, I have recipes for kimchi, even mango kimchi. At some point I wanted to make a miso, maybe we could all do that together. But yeah, if there's any fermentation project that you would like, whether it's, hey, I want to learn how to make a stout, I want to learn how to make perry, I want to learn how to make kombucha. Follow our Facebook links. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or just email us. We'll be answering as many questions as we can, any of the comment sections or any place where you contact us. So